Italian Mafia. Who is truly the most powerful boss? As Cosa Nostra weakens, another force has risen in the shadows. Ndrangheta. No need for ostentatious violence. No need for high-profile assassinations. They manipulate the world with a weapon far more terrifying: money and absolute silence. But are they truly invincible? If one day, Ndrangheta falls, who will take their place? Camorra, the South American cartels, or an unseen cybercriminal force yet to emerge? This story is not just about the Mafia, but about power, betrayal, and conspiracies capable of controlling an entire nation without anyone ever knowing. Italy, 20th century. When people think of the Mafia, the first name that comes to mind is the Sicilian Mafia, Cosa Nostra. The criminal organization that once haunted the police, politicians, and Western society. But few know that, in the shadows, another force was quietly rising. No noise, no boasting, no need for the glamour of Hollywood. This was Ndrangheta, the mafia organization from Calabria. If Cosa Nostra was built on rules, with its infamous godfathers embodying an image of elegance and discipline, then Ndrangheta followed a quieter but deadlier path. From the rugged mountains of Calabria, they methodically dismantled the Sicilian empire with a weapon no one expected: absolute secrecy and unlimited wealth. Cosa Nostra was once the most powerful force, not just in Italy but also in the United States. The problem was that they were too greedy, too flamboyant, and too brutal. They openly challenged the government, defied the police, assassinated politicians, and became entangled in too many scandals. They controlled everything from small neighborhood streets to luxurious Las Vegas casinos, even manipulating politics. But this visibility made them the #1 enemy of the Italian government. Especially in 1992, when the renowned judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino were assassinated. Italy erupted in fury. The government could no longer tolerate them. A series of crackdowns followed. Hundreds of Cosa Nostra members were arrested, and those who once held power were exposed. As Cosa Nostra struggled under suppression, another organization quietly grew stronger. Ndrangheta did not rely on flashy violence, did not attack politicians, and did not make headlines with high-profile assassinations. Instead, they chose to operate from the shadows, acting with intelligence and efficiency. While the government focused all its efforts on Cosa Nostra, Ndrangheta quickly took over what was left behind: drug markets, money laundering networks, and, most importantly, financial control. One of the biggest differences between the two organizations lies in how they structure their power. Cosa Nostra operated like a pyramid, where power was concentrated in the hands of the godfathers. When these bosses were captured, the entire system risked collapse. In contrast, Ndrangheta had no single supreme leader. Power was decentralized, operating through a family-based model where everything was built on blood ties. Only those with direct family connections could join. There were no traitors, no informants. Because of this, even when some members were arrested, the organization remained unshaken. A question arises: if Ndrangheta was so powerful, why didn't they dominate earlier like Cosa Nostra? The answer is simple: patience. Cosa Nostra rose to power quickly because they wanted everything at once: money, power, and fame. But Ndrangheta understood that true power does not come from display but from silent control. While Cosa Nostra was busy with bloody wars, Ndrangheta focused only on money. The difference between these two organizations is also evident in their criminal business strategies. Cosa Nostra once controlled heroin smuggling, primarily through connections with the American Mafia. However, as governments cracked down on heroin trafficking, they lost their main source of income. Meanwhile, Ndrangheta saw an opportunity in another market: cocaine. They didn't just import from South America, they established direct transportation and distribution networks, cutting out intermediaries and maximizing profits. While the US and Italian governments concentrated on the war against heroin, Ndrangheta became the cocaine kingpins of Europe, controlling over 80% of the market. Cosa Nostra was everywhere, but their dominance was always based on violence and fear. When the government struck back, those who feared for their lives turned on each other. In contrast, Ndrangheta didn't need threats, didn't need guns. They controlled everything through money and relationships. They didn't need to bribe police officers to avoid investigations. They bought entire political and economic systems. The question now is Ndrangheta truly invincible? Will they repeat Cosa Nostra's history? Or will they one day fall as well? With their airtight structure and immense financial power, Ndrangheta appears to be at the peak of its dominance. But no empire lasts forever. Cosa Nostra once believed in their own eternity, only to be betrayed by those who once swore loyalty. So who's to say Ndrangheta won't meet the same fate? Could a new criminal force be silently rising, waiting for the right moment, just as Ndrangheta once did to Cosa Nostra? And if that day comes, what will become of Italy's underworld? In the next part, we will uncover the true secrets behind Ndrangheta's power, from their control over the drug market and money laundering operations to their unnoticed infiltration into political systems. But will all these factors truly make them invincible? Or will these very secrets lead to their downfall? When Cosa Nostra was hunted down to the point of weakness, the survivors realized one thing: violence was no longer the way to dominate. But that did not mean the Mafia disappeared. They no longer needed bloodshed in the streets or public assassinations. Yet their power continued to expand. Ndrangheta not only learned from Cosa Nostra's mistakes but also developed an entirely new model, controlling everything without anyone knowing. And what made them stronger than any criminal organization before them was the way they operated in absolute darkness. No one saw them, but they were everywhere. The rise of Ndrangheta was not just luck. They realized something that Cosa Nostra had overlooked. If they wanted to survive in the long run, they could not rely solely on protection rackets or small-scale smuggling. They needed something more valuable than anything else. Something that no change in the law could stop. And the answer was drugs. Not heroin, like in the days of Cosa Nostra, but cocaine, the most profitable commodity in the criminal world. Ndrangheta saw the opportunity early. And instead of acting as mere intermediaries like other organizations, they directly controlled the entire supply chain. From the forests of Colombia to the ports of Europe, each shipment brought in billions of euros. A figure that even the major South American cartels had to respect. But they did not stop at drugs. Ndrangheta understood that money only had true value when it could be legitimized. That is why they infiltrated legitimate industries. From banking and real estate to politics itself. They did not need to bribe individual police officers like Cosa Nostra had done. They bought entire financial systems, ensuring that every dirty transaction was cleaned without a trace. Whereas the old Mafia had to move cash in secret, Ndrangheta ran legitimate companies, invested in major corporations, and even took part in government public works projects. So what made Ndrangheta so powerful? The answer lay in their family-based structure. While Cosa Nostra was ultimately brought down by traitors, Ndrangheta had almost no defectors. Not because of loyalty, but because of the tight bond of blood relations. A person can betray an organization, but can they betray their own family? When every member is bound by blood, when a family's survival depends on the organization's existence, betrayal is not an option. But even a seemingly perfect system has its cracks. Some high-ranking members have begun turning themselves in, revealing secrets never before made public. The question is, when one person breaks the silence, can the others continue to keep their mouths shut? Unity exists only as long as common interests are protected. But if Ndrangheta comes under enough pressure, will these families remain loyal? Or will they turn on each other to save themselves? The real question now is, can the Italian government truly bring down this empire? Crackdowns have been launched, but all they have managed to capture are small links in the chain. Ndrangheta does not operate as a single organization with one leader, they are a vast network. With each family running independently yet maintaining hidden connections. Cutting off one branch does not bring down the tree. But if all the branches are severed, can they still survive? With increasing arrests, growing pressure from authorities, and the first wave of defectors appearing, the question is no longer whether Ndrangheta can be defeated. It is when that will happen. And more importantly, if they fall, who will take over the underworld? Will a new organization rise? Or will Italy finally break free from the centuries-old grip of the Mafia? Cosa Nostra once believed they were invincible. But they collapsed. Ndrangheta now stands at the peak of power. But can they avoid the same fate? In the next part, we will delve deeper into the risks Ndrangheta faces, the factors that could push them to the brink of collapse, and, more importantly, if this empire falls, what will happen to Italy's criminal underworld? Ndrangheta is at the peak of its power. Unlike Cosa Nostra, there are no public bloodbaths, no high-profile assassinations that ignite national outrage in Italy. But it is precisely this silence that makes them more terrifying than anything else. When their enemies were organizations like Cosa Nostra or Camorra, they could easily be defeated with money and patience. But if their real enemy is the very expansion of their own power, then the story becomes entirely different. No organization is invincible. Even empires that lasted for centuries eventually crumbled. And Ndrangheta is no exception. So, what could cause this empire to shake? Could there be a mistake that pushes them to the brink of collapse? Just as Cosa Nostra once destroyed itself? Or is there another force silently waiting to overthrow them? One of the reasons Ndrangheta has remained so resilient is its closed family structure. But their greatest strength could also become their fatal weakness. Because the system relies entirely on blood ties, the number of members cannot expand quickly. Unlike South American cartels, where loyal outsiders can join without family connections, Ndrangheta only trusts its own bloodline. But what happens when the younger generation no longer wants to continue on this path? When a defector appears, will the others remain loyal? Or will they begin to doubt? There have already been signs of the first cracks. Some high-ranking members have turned themselves in, providing information about the organization. This had never happened before. If one person can betray, why can't others? And once the silence is broken, a domino effect may follow. The greatest fear of a criminal organization is not the police, but betrayal from within. Cosa Nostra did not fall because the government was stronger, it fell because those within its own ranks turned against it. But even without betrayal, the Italian government has recognized that Ndrangheta is the true enemy. In recent years, anti-mafia forces have changed their strategy, not just arresting criminals but directly targeting their finances, freezing assets, and blocking the flow of dirty money. Without money, Ndrangheta loses its most powerful weapon. If politicians can no longer be bribed, the organization loses its shield of protection. And if banks refuse to handle illicit funds, the foundations of their empire could begin to crumble. But is that really enough to defeat them? Or will the government make the same mistake it did with Cosa Nostra, believing that a few arrests can change an entire system? The Mafia is not eliminated just because a few bosses are imprisoned. It disappears only when the system that sustains it is completely dismantled. The even bigger concern is that other criminal organizations are watching closely. If Ndrangheta weakens, who will take their place? Could Camorra from Naples rise to power? Or will the Russian Mafia, with its vast financial resources, seize control of the European market? Mexican cartels have cooperated with Ndrangheta, but if they realize they no longer need them, what will happen? The question is not just whether Ndrangheta can be defeated, but what will happen if they weaken. When one criminal force disappears, another usually takes its place. And no one knows how dangerous the next one will be. If the government cannot control this game, are they unknowingly paving the way for an even stronger criminal organization to emerge? The rise of Ndrangheta did not happen overnight, and if they fall, it will also be a long process. But if the first signs have already appeared, is this the beginning of the end? Or do they still have secret moves to continue dominating the underworld for decades to come? In the next part, we will delve deeper into other criminal organizations around the world and examine whether there is truly a force capable of overthrowing Ndrangheta. If Ndrangheta disappears one day, who will be the next to take control? And more importantly, how will the world of organized crime change? No organization lasts forever. Even the greatest empires eventually fall. Cosa Nostra was once invincible, yet it was defeated. Ndrangheta is now at the height of its power. But can it maintain its position forever? Or is this just a phase before a new force emerges to replace it? The question is not just whether Ndrangheta can be defeated, but who will take control of the underworld if they weaken. Looking back at the history of the Italian Mafia, one pattern is clear. When one organization declines, another rises. Cosa Nostra dominated the 20th century. But when the government cracked down on them, Ndrangheta swiftly took over the market and became the most powerful criminal syndicate. So, if Ndrangheta is one day defeated, who will replace them? Another Italian mafia group, or an international organization with even greater ambitions? A potential contender is Camorra, the mafia group from Naples. Unlike Cosa Nostra and Ndrangheta, Camorra does not operate under a tightly knit family system but instead functions as a loose alliance of criminal clans. This makes them more flexible, more adaptable, and capable of expanding their ranks quickly. If Ndrangheta weakens, Camorra could seize the opportunity to expand, particularly in drug trafficking and money laundering. However, their biggest weakness is internal conflict. Unlike Ndrangheta, where family ties keep power stable, Camorra is constantly plagued by infighting, making long-term dominance uncertain. But what if the next dominant force is not an Italian mafia group? Another strong contender could be Eastern European mafias, particularly the Russian mafia. They have enormous financial resources and control global money laundering and arms trafficking networks. If Ndrangheta weakens, Russian mafia groups could exploit this opportunity to penetrate deeper into Europe, particularly in the financial sector. What's even more alarming is that the Russian mafia is not just rich, they also have ties to high-level politicians and power structures, making them virtually untouchable in many cases. Beyond the Russian mafia, another serious threat comes from South American drug cartels, particularly Mexican cartels. For years, Ndrangheta has acted as the intermediary, importing cocaine from South America and distributing it across Europe. But what if the Mexican cartels decide they no longer need Ndrangheta and move to control the European market directly? This could trigger an underground war, as cartels attempt to bypass Italian mafia groups and gain direct access to European ports. If this happens, Ndrangheta's dominance over the cocaine trade could be seriously threatened, and once they lose their primary source of income, their entire system could begin to crumble. Another factor that could shift the entire landscape is technology and cybercrime. In the past, the mafia relied on traditional money laundering methods through banks and shell companies. But today, cryptocurrency has changed everything. Criminal organizations no longer need a complex network to launder dirty money. They can use Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies to move funds anonymously and evade law enforcement. This is why cybercriminal groups are becoming increasingly influential in the underworld. If traditional mafia organizations fail to adapt, they may gradually be replaced by entirely new forms of organized crime, ones that operate entirely in the digital realm, beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement. So, what happens if Ndrangheta collapses? An underground war between various criminal organizations could break out, and no one can predict who will emerge victorious. If Camorra rises, we may see a more agile but also more chaotic mafia, prone to instability. If the Russian mafia expands its influence, the underworld could shift from drug trafficking to large-scale financial crime and economic manipulation. If Mexican cartels eliminate intermediaries and take full control of the European drug trade, we may witness brutal violence in Europe similar to what has occurred in Mexico. Or, if cybercrime organizations gain power, we could see an entirely new generation of mafia that no longer relies on guns or physical violence but controls everything through data and cryptocurrency. The final question is, if the Italian government truly succeeds in taking down Ndrangheta, will it be a real victory? Or will they simply be clearing the way for an even more dangerous organization to rise? If history has taught us anything, it's that when one criminal empire falls, another often takes its place. And it is very likely that the next generation of organized crime will be even more formidable than anything we have seen before. In the next part, we will explore how governments are fighting organized crime, whether they truly have a chance at eradicating the mafia, and how the underworld might evolve in the future. Can the mafia be wiped out entirely? Or will it simply transform into a more sophisticated, harder to detect entity? The mafia is not just about street gangs. It is a hidden power structure capable of manipulating economies and politics. Ndrangheta has risen to dominance. But no empire lasts forever. The question is not whether they will fall, But when, and who will take control of the underworld next? Is there a new, more sophisticated, and even more dangerous force waiting in the shadows to replace them? What do you think? Is Ndrangheta truly invincible? Or is this the final stage before their decline? Share your thoughts in the comments and let's discuss. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the world of organized crime.